Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for January 10th, 2023. And today we're going to look at the question of who can you trust, given the revelations in recent weeks that show the absolutely untrustworthy nature of the Western spokesman, whether it's NATO countries, whether it's the US, the UK. The question is, who can be negotiated with? And if there is no negotiation, how is this war going to end? There was a panel discussion sponsored by the Diane Sayre campaign on Sunday, where the discussion led to a conclusion that there's a stalemate between Russia and the West. The stalemate of the sort that neither NATO nor the Russians are prepared to end the war on the other's terms. Now, for Russia, these terms are the same ones that Putin put forward back a year ago in December 2021. No NATO membership for Ukraine, no offensive weapons in Ukraine, the end of the killing in the Donbass in the Ukrainian civil war, in which the victims are Ukrainian citizens of Russian origin, and denazification. Now, at one point, Zelensky had more or less agreed to accept all the terms except the denazification, as the official line in the West is there are no Nazis in Ukraine, which is another lie. But the problem was that NATO would not allow a settlement, and Boris Johnson was sent there to tell the Ukrainians, we intend to give you more weapons and more money so you can lose more lives. And that's where we are now. Now, the US NATO terms are that Russia must withdraw from all territory in Ukraine, return all lands, including Crimea, and that Russia has no say in the expansion of NATO. That is, NATO will go as far east as they can, and now we're seeing the global NATO include the Pacific region. And finally, reparations and war crime tribunals. Now, there's no sign of willingness to compromise on this. And negotiations, in fact, are defined by the West as appeasement, as giving in to Russia's demands for an expanding empire. So the consensus that was reached at the January 8th event is that we're facing a situation of permanent war, which could become a nuclear war, either by accident or by false flag, which could threaten the lives of everyone on the planet. Now, how can this be resolved? There's only one way, diplomacy. But diplomacy requires an ability to trust. As Ronald Reagan famously said, trust but verify. And I understand that's actually an old Russian proverb. But how can you trust when you've seen one lie after another coming from your adversary? So who can be trusted to tell the truth? Now, the West is saying that Putin is lying, that Putin's intention is to expand Russia's borders to incorporate the old Soviet empire and beyond. Now, there's no evidence for this. The Russian policy, even where they've sent troops into other areas, has been to defend the security of the Russian state. So there's no evidence to back up the allegation that Putin is a desperate warmonger who's hungry to grab up additional land. As for the West, well, where do you begin? The lies began after the fall of the Soviet Union, when the Russians were promised no eastward expansion of NATO. What about the lies behind the Iraq War, behind the Libya intervention, both of which were US and NATO? What about the deployments into Syria, which were based on lies, the lies of defending democracy and the moderate rebels who turned out to be ISIS terrorists that the West was training and arming? All these events were used to set up a security state in the United States with mass surveillance, which was lied about. Again, the American people were not told the truth about the intention of the Patriot Act, the censorship, and so on. All of this, the protection of lies, for what purpose? How about regime change in Ukraine in February 2014? We were told it was to defend democracy in Ukraine. Well, Victoria Nuland admitted that the United States spent $5 billion a rare occasion, by the way, in which the truth was told, $5 billion to build for the Maidan coup. Now, who lied about Minsk? We now know that Merkel and Hollande confessed that they never intended for the Minsk Accord to usher in a period of peace in eastern Ukraine. They admitted they lied. And why did they lie? To buy time to prepare Ukraine for war with Russia. So when people say it's Russia that's the cause of the war, the Russians were the aggressor, it was unprovoked, well, they've now admitted that going back to 2014, they were prepared for war with Russia and were building up from that. What about Russiagate? This was totally based on lies. And what was the purpose of the lies? To prevent President Trump from fulfilling his promise to make Russia and the United States friends, to lessen the danger of war and nuclear war. So the question then is, why go to war? Why lie to go to war? Is it to defend Ukrainian sovereignty? Another lie. How sovereign is a country when Nuland spoke to the U.S. Ambassador Payat to Ukraine, dictating who was going to become the president after the coup? That's sovereignty? That's democracy? The idea that we're defending Ukrainian democracy when the political opposition is jailed, the media is shut down, the political parties are banned. Well, the argument that we're there to stop Russia from rebuilding the Soviet empire, Putin was trying since 2007, 2008 to negotiate security guarantees, not just for Russia, but for the countries surrounding Russia. And what was the response? It was never accepted. They denied that there was ever a reason. They denied an aggressive intent, which is belied now by all these statements about what happened after Minsk. So the question then is, why is Ukraine being victimized by this proxy war? Well, because that's what NATO wants. And NATO's explicit. They want to degrade Russia. They want to defeat Russia. Now, this was admitted by Defense Minister Ryaznikov in an interview last week. He said, quote, "We are carrying out NATO's mission today without shedding their blood. We shed our blood, that is Ukrainian blood, so we expect them to supply weapons." Now, what's the context for that remark? He's basically saying that Ukraine is being destroyed, but they're doing it on behalf of NATO. This is even more explicit in statements issued by Ukraine's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Vadim Pristaiko. He gave an interview with Newsweek that was published January 7th. And what he said is, quote, "We've been in the war for almost a year now. We're losing people left and right. We're not advertising how many of those are lost, are military or civilians, but you can imagine that the numbers are huge, indigestible. And the cities, some of them are totally destroyed," he told Newsweek. Then he said, "There's no reason to stop for negotiations now because the Russians will keep trying to grab land." But then he said, "The West now has a unique chance. There are not many nations in the world who would allow themselves to sacrifice so many lives, territories, and decades of development for the purpose of defeating the arch enemy." In other words, all of this is intended to defeat Russia, not to defend Ukraine. They're willing to sacrifice Ukraine. That's a point that I made in a number of interviews that got me placed on the Committee to Combat Disinformation censorship list by the Ukrainian government, the kill list, the target list, which includes people like Scott Ritter, Tucker Carlson, and importantly, Helga Zepp-LaRouche at the top. We were saying this, that this is an attack on Ukraine coming from the West to use Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. We were attacked as Putin puppets for this. But now you see from the Ukrainian officials the same statement. We are sacrificing our lives for NATO. Now, who's this Pristaiko? Well, he was one of the chief negotiators of the Minsk agreement, which means he was in on the fix. And in February 2015, right after the agreement was signed, Minsk II, he was then deputy foreign minister, and he told Canada's CBC radio, quote, "We don't want to scare everybody, but we are preparing for full-scale war. We expect from the world is that the world will stiffen up in the spine a little." So he acknowledged that the coming out of Minsk, the intent for Ukraine was to go to full-scale war with Russia. So how is this Putin's fault? Once again, we see lie after lie coming from the West. Now, what's the reason for this? Well, NATO is a military arm of the Anglo-American financial empire. It's promoting and defending the unipolar order. And its so-called rules-based order says that you do what we say. This is said to sovereign nations around the world. You give up your sovereignty. You do what we tell you to do financially. Let us loot you. Let us carry out our predatory looting of your population. If you resist, you have to face NATO. We'll have war, coups, assassinations, and so on. And look at Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. So what's the point I'm getting at here? How many lives must be sacrificed for the sake of bailing out bankrupt Western financial institutions? Are you willing to sacrifice your life and the life of your loved ones to defend the interests of NATO, which are the interests of the global financial network, which is cratering right now because of wrong policies for the last 50 years? Do you really wish to give up your life so they can be bailed out again? So the issue then is, who can you trust? You have to make yourself trustworthy. Join with us. We're offering a historically validated approach to ending wars, that you have negotiations which include no revenge motive, which include recognizing the interests of the other. That's the only way to end the situation. Otherwise, you may get a short-term truce, but unless you have a development policy which benefits all people in the war, you're going to end up planting the seeds for the next war. So I'll have coming up shortly an announcement as to how you can join us and help us. But in the meantime, share this video and get your friends involved with the LaRouche organization as we have the approach that's necessary to get negotiations.